Oh, my apologies. I accidentally closed OBS by mistake. So, essentially, if I'm going to chat again and say, sorry, everybody. Sorry, everybody. So, I guess one podcast is going to be split into two. So, I apologize to everybody. Now, we're going to look at Machine and Structure by Pierre Félix Gattari. The distinction I am proposing, given the fact that this is showing what I wanted to show, which I sincerely doubt. I'm sure I'm probably going to have to fix this up too. Hang on 1 second. What a bloody mess. Aperçu, quitter, machine structure. You want to share this? We don't know why. There we go. I'm over here, but it doesn't matter. So it's even better because the text is larger. So this is Pierre Félix Gattari, Machine and Structure. And where do I have to scroll? Windows, no, Mac always freaks me out. I don't know why I spent all these years supporting it, but the distinction I'm proposing between machine and structure is based solely on the way we use the words. We may consider that we are merely dealing with a written device of the kind one has to invent for dealing with a mathematical problem, or with an axiom that may have to be reconsidered at a particular stage of development, or again with the kind of machine we shall be talking about here. And I'm going to skip around because Gattari is very, very difficult, but let's go here. The agent of action, whose definition here does not extend beyond this principle of reciprocal determination, is included in the structure. The structural process of detotalized totalization encloses the subject and the will. And will not let go as long as it is in a position to recuperate with another structural determination. So once again, not a job here tonight. Gattari is incredibly difficult to read, but the machine, on the other hand, remains essentially remote from the agent of action. So the subject is always somewhere else. So this is a very simple way. I'm going to highlight that for Gattari to say the machine. I would like to say in Deleuzian terms, meaning abstract or virtual, but not only, is always remote from the agent of action. The subject is already somewhere else. So the important thing here is we understand that in Gattari's terms, that the subject is not defined by the machine. If we go back to what we said before, the linguistics, A is not a positive. A tree is not a tree. Temporalization penetrates the machine on all sides and can be related to it only after the fashion of an event. The emergence of the machine marks a date, a change different from a structural representation. So, beyond this very simple reading we're doing here, what I would advise to everyone is to take this essay and read it, because this is Pierre Félix Gattari. And if you have read L'Antiadipa, Mille Plateau, I would maintain that Qu'est-ce que c'est la philosophie is a little bit different due to circumstances, etc. But try and ask yourself how much of this is Gattari, by zone. So try and ask yourself how much of that is a part of Antiope and Mir Plateau. And going forward, for the machine, the subject of history is elsewhere in the structure. In fact, the subject of the structure, considered in its relationship of alienation, classic Marx, to a system of totalization, should rather be seen in relation to a phenomenon of being an ego. The ego here being in contrast with the subject of the unconscious as it corresponds to the principle stated by Lacan. A signifier represents it for another signifier. So Lacanian philosophy, a signifier always refers to a chain of other signifiers. The unconscious subject as such will be on the same side of the machine, or better perhaps, alongside the machine. There's no break in the machine itself. The breach is on either side of it. But I still have to find us the individual's relation to the machine has been described by sociologists following Friedman as one of fundamental alienation. Alienation, classic Marx. This is undoubtedly true if one considers the individual as a structure for totalization of the imaginary. But the dialectic of the master craftsman and the apprentice, the old pictures of the different trades flourishing in different parts of the country, all this has become meaningless in the face of modern mechanized industry that requires, this is what I was looking for, I got lucky, it's skilled workers to start from scratch again with every new technological advance. But does not this starting from scratch mark precisely that essential breakthrough that characterizes the unconscious subject? So, let me move this and see if I can. I know it's better if you guys don't see my face, but let me see. Oh, here I am, peekaboo. I've said this before. I'll give you a classic example. Born in the early 1970s, grew up and studied as an architect. So when I grew up, you would start with a pencil and paper, and then we went on to ink and vellum, oh my god, transfer sheets, and then the first AutoCAD came out where we would have this big massive fucking box that costed, you know, so much, and then the years went on, and then you had to learn. I'm sure there's some people who understand this. Then you had to learn 2D AutoCAD, perfect. And if you wanted to have a good job, you had to learn 3D. But no, then you had to learn 3D Max. We got into the whole rendering issue. The Lightscape, I remember Lightscape. I'm very nostalgic for Lightscape and all of those programs. And then we went on to BIM, Building Information Modeling. And then we went into parametric modeling. No? So at least for very simple architectural drawings, you know, the technology just completely forced us to learn all of these kinds of problems, and what that does in relation to the unconscious subject of an architect, I don't know, but I can promise you I drink a lot. So that's certainly one effect of this whole thing, but that's not our problem. Now, I'm just trying to give really simple examples. So the same thing, think about other trades, think about the evolution of the production of an automobile, think about the evolution of sewing, of fashion, of shoe design, of whatever you want. It's constantly in evolution, and as Guattari says, it requires its skilled workers to start again from scratch. And once again, I would love to spend hours and hours and hours with you and go over all these subjects, and I would do it, but we would have insanely long podcasts. The only point I'm trying to say is you, our followers who know this stuff, you should already find this as being very, very Marxist, you know? And this is Pierre Félix Guattari. Okay, so in this sense, the worker's alienation to the machine excludes him from any kind of structural equilibrium and puts him in a position where he is as close to possible to a radical system of realignment. We might say of castration. Oh, Pierre Félix, my goodness, my dear friend, where he loses all tranquility, all self-confirming security, all the justification of a sense of belonging to a skilled trade. So, as always, for castration, I would really have to think about that. But once again, the point is that we're just looking at how Marxist Guattari was, and that's the main point. I'm going to avoid the details, otherwise we can lose weeks and weeks and weeks. If you guys want to do that for weeks, I'm up to it, but we have to drink a lot while we do this podcast. So I'm asking a question: do you want to go into this text? Oh my goodness, this text by Guattari further. So on my live chat, I'm asking people, do we want to get into this in our upcoming podcasts or not? Is it something that you would prefer to do on your own? So our only point here is, as compared to the work done by machines, the work of human beings is nothing. This working and nothing in the special sense in which people do it today, which tends more and more to be merely a response to a machine. So the work we do today, I kind of agree with this, is we're responding to the work of machines, pressing a red or black button to produce an effect programmed somewhere else. Human work, in other words, is the only residue that has not yet been integrated into the work of machines. So think about today and all the discussion of AI, artificial intelligence, no? If we expand our vision of machine from technical machine to digital machine, coding machines, everything is up for grabs. But obviously, the whole point here is that for Guattari, and eventually we'll see in Deepa, is he's bringing this metaphor of the machine all the way into, we've already seen it, into psychology, into structure, into meaning and significance. And so this is a huge, as stated in the interview, globalized new concept, a global concept of the machine, which is going to be brought more or less by Deleuze and Guattari to everything they do in the three major works together. So, do we need to go even just But my point here is to give you the vocabulary. Every new discovery in the sphere of scientific research, for example, moves across the structural field of theory like a war machine. So, bingo, a war machine is... Does that term come from Pierre Félix Guattari? Does it come from Deleuze? Because I will verify this again, but as far as I know, Machine and Structure is a text written by Pierre Félix Guattari. So you're also going to have this whole issue of what belongs to whom in those three major works by Deleuze and Guattari. And then I go here. It is true that this unconscious subjectivity has a split which is overcome in a signifying chain, which would kind of sort of be structure, is being transferred away from individuals and human groups towards the worlds of machines. It still remains just as unrepresentable at the specifically machinic level. It is a signifier detached from the unconscious structural chain that will act as a representative to represent the machine. So once again, I could spend a good few hours and buy a good few drinks trying to figure out what Pierre Félix is saying here. I kind of sort of get the sense, but personally, I find that just this paragraph like really interesting and thought-provoking, and my first intuition is to say that today we're all, on our iPhones and tablets and our social media. I mean, I just find like a kind of this to be so relevant, and I will absolutely get back to that, but I'm not sure if we want to spend too much more time with this. I will put this into this link, and as like I said, you guys are always much more savvy than I am when it is. So Machine and Structure, Pierre Félix Guattari, you will dig that up, absolutely. But my point here is following the logic of, let's see if we can bring them up. Here we go. The interview before that. The whole point is here is that Deleuze, up until his encounter with Guattari, Karl Marx was very peripheral. But as I hope I just demonstrated, that production, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean it's Karl Marx, but we know it is, so we can't deny it. But this whole idea of production, machines, material production, technology comes from Guattari, and he's taking it in this essay to a whole other level, which I would argue becomes central, as we saw in the interview before. This kind of all-encompassing concept of the machine, where we'll get into content, expression, Ferdinand, Saussure, etc., etc. But my point, we're just doing detective work for now. We can't understand everything, and I repeat, for me, Guattari is tough going, but definitely worthwhile. The further you can go with your machete, the better off you will be, in my opinion. But I'm going to try and just dip quickly back into this, because we're just trying to understand essentially that the Marxism comes from Guattari. Let's make it simple. It comes much more from Guattari than it comes from Gilles Deleuze. And I think in our interview, we're talking about Althusser. And I guess, unfortunately, I keep hoping to close this issue up, but I'm just going to get really quick because this is pretty complicated. We're going to get into the next question to Isabelle Garot. And I'm going to try and shut this thing off here, or at least substitute it with our wonderful pages. Thank you, Steve. You're the best. Let me see if I can translate the question. So the question, for those who have watched us, and I keep repeating it because I think it's kind of hard to remember. There's complicated stuff all comes in this. So this is an interview with Isabelle Garot, who is a noted French expert on Karl Marx, and we are also at the same time the same interview. You also have Anna Savagnarga, and right now yesterday we watched the pieces from Savagnarga, and we'll get back to her. But the new question goes back to Isabelle Garot. And I should understand the Windows keyboard right now, so let me translate the question made to her very quickly, which is and here we're going to get into a new figure whose name is Althusser, which complicated matters even a bit further, but let's just see. This is the question to Isabelle Garot. You see, pages could care less. Oh, there we go. It's not even, so this is the next question, our essay, regarding obviously the role of Deleuze and Guattari to Karl Marx. Isabelle Garot, why did I do the French? Once again, my apologies, fix that up pretty quick. We make mistakes, however, at our age, we still seem to be capable of fixing them pretty rapidly. Huh? And this time it's not going to be that way because I said it. So, let's just drop this straight into English and see what happens. There, oof, there we go. So, is this even correct? Yes. Isabelle Garot, in your obviously book on Althusser, just to remind you, is one of the fundamental Marxist figures in French intellectual society from post-war onwards. So in your Althusser, Foucault, Deleuze and Marx, you analyze the paradoxical convergence of Deleuze and Althusser that Anne Savagnarga, not an easy name to pronounce, Savagnarga, mentioned a few moments ago. Both endeavor to criticize the Hegelian dialectic and its internal teleology. Both begin by opposing to dialectical idealism a conception of structures, highlighting their conditions of irreducible internal multiplicity and inequality. Both resort to Spinoza to redefine a materialistic singularity of the Marxist dialectic. On another line, you also suggest resonances with the late Althusser and the extrapolations of random materialism from the problems of contingency and conjuncture that preoccupied Althusser from the beginning. You also mention in the passing of the appropriation of the work. What a question. What's up? I thought I translated it all. Hang on. Let's see. What have I missed? Extrapolations. Vous rappelez. Okay, so apparently not me, Google Translate has created a few problems, and I am just going to join random materialisme aléatoire. That will be random materialisme. Okay, so I'm going to add on right now the next piece in English. Let's just erase this. Oh, this is the end of the question. This is a freaking crazy question. But don't worry. Things should be pretty clear by now. So I was missing this last part of the question to Isabelle Garot. You also mention in passing the appropriation of the work of the Althusserians in Anti-Oedipus. How do you understand this underground dialogue, if it is one? Opportunistic tactic in the service of the Deleuzian heresy in the academic field, theoretical and ideological operation determinable by its stakes or its effects. So, our question, which started, I still have it here in French. What a freaking whopping demand. Try asking this question to Kamala Harris or Donald Trump and see what kind of answer they're going to give you. He's asking them, Isabelle Garot, in your work with Althusser, Michel Foucault, and Deleuze and Marx, you have analyzed the paradoxical convergence between Deleuze and Althusser. Keep in mind, another issue, but Althusser is probably one of the most important founders of Marxism in French. So you have analyzed the paradoxical convergence between Deleuze and Althusser, which is a very interesting question on its own, which Anne Savognard evoked a little bit ago, meaning the previous question. One and the other have employed a critical dialectic towards Hegel and his teleology, his internal teleology, and both one and the other, this is Deleuze and Althusser, begin to oppose the dialectical idealism of obviously Hegel and the conception of structures which are put ahead, in front of, or preceding, my translation, conditions of multiplicity and irreducible inequality of internal relations. So once again, pretty complicated, but this part is pretty easy. So, structure, like we said, let's just go back to a very simple example, and sometimes you just have to do it because once you get it, you apply it everywhere. Noam Chomsky, not to critique, I'm not critiquing Noam Chomsky, but Noam Chomsky, like many others, says that language is an ideal structure which is there, and it's just a question of discovering it and getting it down, and we are ignorant, but if we continue to move forward, there is a pre-existing Platonic transcendental structure of meaning in language. This obviously is challenged by one kind of way by Deleuze, and another kind of way Deleuze and Guattari, and we're also saying here that Althusser is also someone that was interested in this challenge. This problem was manifested in Hegel, and very interestingly, there's this whole relationship with Spinoza and the Marxist dialectic, but that's kind of dangerous. I wouldn't go too far in that. But yes, Spinoza is obviously a materialist. No, when Spinoza talks about substance, attributes, and modes are real. So Spinoza is inherently a materialist because his interest is fundamentally in the nodes and how they are folded or involved in substance and attributes. So that's very, very materialist. And honestly, I'm not even sure if I understood the question, because that was a big one. And let's just look at, fortunately, Isabel will give us a brief answer, because I'm sure she's much smarter than her male interlocutor. And she's going to give us a brief question, and we will shut down tonight's podcast on this point. And I'm sure she's going to give us something very, very concise and practical. And let's see if that's true. And perfect. And this is on the relation between Deleuze and Althusser. Let's see if I can copy and put that in our wonderful pages. We managed to do it. So to close things down here tonight, OBS, no, my God. Why at this point do you have to give me these problems? And there, the rapprochement. Obviously, rapprocher means to get close to someone else. So the becoming close between Deleuze and Althusser is above all the work of the later Althusser himself, even if Deleuze is the first to mobilize the reference to Althusser because of his anti-Hegelianism. So, very easy. Deleuze had already kind of conceptually enrolled. Is this all visible or no? Yes, it is. Althusser because an anti-Hegelian. And believe me, in those times, there were very few anti-Hegelians. And believe me, in our times, there are very few anti-Hegelians. So no surprise that Deleuze, who sure obviously was not naive and skeptical, but creating this relation with Althusser was logically kind of necessary. But this reference is integrated, literally digested by Deleuze within a work fundamentally very far from that of Althusser. So obviously with Deleuze and all the writings we know on Deleuze and Spinoza on Nietzsche is not going to be very close to kind of a traditional hardcore Marxist. So subsequently and much later, it is Louis Althusser who will claim Deleuzian themes, sometimes, but not always, mentioning the work of Gilles Deleuze in final texts, which cannot be read without caution. So once again, as we've always said in this podcast, always be cautious of everybody, especially in Althusser, who is citing your works, and who knows what he's crediting himself, who knows what he's crediting. The Deleuze times may change, but the arrogant will remain the arrogant, and et cetera, et cetera. So the valorization of the encounter, of the contingent, the always radicalized affirmation of the crisis of Marxism places him after the fact in the late lineage of those who were his juniors. But it is then the end of a theoretical trajectory which realigns itself with the currents that have become relatively dominant, at least in the face of defeated Marxism, and not the relaunch of new hypotheses. This is why there is no opportunist tactic here, but rather a recognition, a tribute perhaps, at the same time as an admission of failure. So Isabel is once again talking strictly about Deleuze, his relation with Althusser, and she's kind of criticizing Althusser, saying that, he didn't breathe new life into it, and therefore, and this is not uncommon. I mean, he was kind of an intellectual who was defeated, essentially. But Deleuze, which was the most elder of his juniors, he appropriated the work, whatever it might be, of Gilles Deleuze, and kind of, as Isabel says, as an opportunistic tactic, meaning a tribute, perhaps, meaning perhaps to Deleuze, but I think more to Althusser himself, and at the same time his own admission of failure. So once again, I do not want to take up any more time. It is always, for me, still a pleasure to go over this stuff, and I hope to go further, but I don't want to sit here for another 2 hours and mumble on. And but what we do still know is that Deleuze has his own relationship with Marx up until 1970. And this is primarily through his relationship and criticism to the dialectical idealism of Hegel. However, Deleuze on his own has a certain kind of relationship, intellectual relationship with Althusser, one of the most important proponents of Marxism in France. However, as Isabel has stated, it was more a question of Althusser, who was Deleuze's interest in him was through his anti-Hegelianism, and not a big surprise because Marx himself, had allegedly reversed Hegelianism, which we will get into. But Deleuze was kind of attracted by the anti-Hegelianism to Althusser. But what Isabel is saying here is that it never much amounted to anything. No, if anything, it was kind of a. And I repeat, like I always say on this podcast, you always have to understand the context of people and the qualities of people. And so at this point, what she's saying is that Althusser simply was just kind of old, outdated, was full of himself, and he appropriated some of the work of Deleuze, did mention it in some footnotes, but in the end, Althusser was kind of defeated because he was incapable of advancing Marxism from the context of Karl Marx in Germany to the context of France in the 60s, 70s, and beyond, and therefore she's saying it's just kind of a dead-end route. It was a dead-end route for Gilles Deleuze. So if there's another thing we accomplished tonight, before we just kind of really flip through very quickly the essay by Guattari, in which, and there's no surprise for me, Pierre Félix was like, he was like in a Lamborghini on the highway hitting like 500 kilometers per hour. He was just running with it, with his ideas and concepts, and very, very, very Marxist, but at the same time, not only Marxist, but obviously this whole reworking of the concept of the machine for Guattari will have very, very far-reaching implications, because the machine, as we all know, is not a technical machine. It works as explained on the first 2 pages of the Antidipa by coupure, by interruptions of flows, and then there's just kind of this creation of a concept of machine which kind of necessarily involves machinic production, but being kind of a concept, it will be applied to the machinic production of the unconsciousness. On a Freudian level, if I dream, it's a machinic production. I'm producing in my subconscious or unconscious images, the body without organs will be producing on society all kinds of things. So the machine will kind of be this, in terms of structure, meaning the signified and signifier will no longer be a traditional concept of the machine, meaning a pre-existing transcendental structure of language, but it will be something completely else, where all these things are produced according to the context, according to the virtual forces, which compose them. So quite different. And I repeat again, the only point tonight is, what did we understand? That Deleuze, up until this point, is still pretty distant from Marx, but Guattari is full steam ahead with Marx, but let's be honest, intellectually honest, and keep in mind Guattari correctly is not applying traditional Marxist values. He is completely reinventing Marxist ideas or Marxist concepts. So, once again, there are all kinds of levels that go into this, and it gets highly complicated. Already we've seen with our interview, questions are complicated, answers are complicated. Deleuze is already extremely complicated. Pierre Félix Guattari, without a bottle of vodka, I would not even dare to try and read the first 10 pages of one of his works, which, for me are brilliant, but and then you have Deleuze on his own as an author, and then you have Deleuze and Guattari, who we all know are two individuals in becoming, which are creating kind of an offspring. Deleuze and Guattari, D&G, that's another author. And then you have to go in there, and I may, unfortunately, in D&G itself, there's a whole logic and process of who did this, who did that, this concept was according to whom, this, who did that, who conceded this, who conceded more. Was Deleuze really so interested in Karl Marx, or was that more Guattari? In other issues, was there more Deleuze than Guattari? but you know, you can spend your whole life and go crazy and figure out this stuff. So we're gonna shut off here, and we're just, you know, throwing out as much relevant information as we can according to the time we have available. And hopefully we're kind of like in rugby, you know, we're gonna pass on the ball, and I'm sure those of you out there will pick this up and do a much better job on all of this. So I will do my last text tonight, which we say, we're gonna say shout out to Sarajevo. Hello, Sarajevo. Okay, so our last message is dedicated to Sarajevo, and good night. Thank you as always, and I guess if there's some relative interest, we will keep steamrolling forward in this difficult question, but I think in the end, it's cool. It's not a bad thing to look into. On the contrary. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a lovely evening, and look forward to meeting up with you next time. Hopefully tomorrow. Ciao, ciao, and good evening. Good night.